Hi there, I'm Danny Flex and welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut FLEXpectations. Here every Thursday, 4:30 PM to look ahead to the boxing action over the weekend. And while you'll see on the channel so many previews of Chris Eubank Jr against Liam Williams, which is set for this weekend in Cardiff, I'm going to take a slightly different angle and talk predominantly about Eubank Jr and why this is his acid test. This is crunch time for him. Now, he's had 2 defeats in his career thus far. Early on against Billy Joe Saunders for the British, Commonwealth and European titles. I was in attendance for that. Great fight. Late night, though, unfortunately, at the XL Arena. I think Tyson Fury and Derek Chisora were asked to follow Eubank Jr and Saunders, which they were unable to do, unsurprisingly. And, yeah, we all ended up leaving very, very late into a freezing cold southeast London night. However, Eubank proved a few things in that fight and also exposed some limitations. He showed that he's got a good engine. He was able to really pour it on in the second half of the fight. Famously, of course, he was outboxed for the first 6 or 7 rounds, started his charge, if you like, too late, and didn't seem able to deal with a fast, fleet-footed boxer like Saunders. Didn't seem to know how to cut the ring off, how to pin him down, and how to kind of make Saunders slow down and fight at his pace rather than chasing the fight around the ring. Obviously, no disgrace. Saunders went on to achieve a great deal more after that night, and it was very, very close. And we saw that Eubank never stopped trying. The heart was there, the guts were there, the engine certainly. But just technically and tactically, there were limitations, flaws, if you like. And then we move on after impressing people in the World Boxing Super Series tournament, particularly the knockout of Avni Yildirim, which, while eye-catching highlight reel KO, kind of loses its luster a little bit now that Yildirim's been exposed by the likes of Jack Cullen and Canelo, but then you would expect him to be beaten up by Canelo. So Eubank Jr went in against George Groves in the final of the WBSS, and was just kind of kept on the end of Groves' jab and long straight punches for the majority of the fight. Groves naturally bigger, much more experienced, good power in his shots as well, enough to dissuade Eubank Jr from coming forward recklessly, at least until the final round, where Groves' shoulder injury became apparent and Eubank Jr did have his opponent in lots of trouble. But it was too little too late, quite similar to Sergio Martinez and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., if you can remember that fight, where the Mexican was dominated for 11 of the 12 rounds and then dropped Martinez, I think twice in the final session, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't quite that dramatic in Eubank Jr.'s favour against Groves. But again, those kind of technical and tactical limitations, ways to work his way into a fight against a bigger, rangier opponent, seem to be lacking. And to his credit, he tried to address that. He moved to a new trainer out in the US and then looked at some other people as well, and eventually ended up with the legendary Roy Jones Jr., one of the best pound-for-pound fighters of all time. And there has been criticism that perhaps Eubank Jr is trying too hard to emulate Jones's style, or indeed that Jones himself is trying to teach or mould Eubank Jr in his own image. I'm not sure how true that is. I think if you spend a lot of time around someone, they teach you some of the elements that made them so successful. It's only natural that you're going to pick up parts of what they did well. But I just think that Eubank Jr is a fighter in transition between styles, or has been. I think he's only been with Jones Jr for a little while, and it takes time to really bed in with a new trainer, and so that you look like you've been doing it for years. I think the plus point is that Eubank Jr has never really seemed to listen to the trainer. He's always felt, especially when he was working with Ronnie Davis, who famously trained his legendary father. And he always seemed to think he was the boss. And he probably was in the gym and in the corner. I don't think there's any question of him being the boss now with a legend like Roy Jones Jr. I think Jones's accomplishments have forced or compelled Eubank to respect him and to listen to what he says and to follow it and to do his best. I think he realises now as well that, you know, he's getting on in age a bit. He's come up short on his 2 biggest fights so far. And I think he knows now that this is last chance saloon. You know, he'll always be able to sell fights. He's a good talker. He's charismatic. He's got the Eubank name. And he is a good fighter. He is exciting to watch at times in the ring. He's explosive. He can punch. But I think the flip side to that is he is getting on in age. There's other exciting, explosive fighters emerging who have had maybe more amateur background than he has, more experience at a younger age. And now he's kind of fighting to keep his career, certainly at world level, going. He's got high rankings for many, certainly the WBA and I think a couple of other sanctioning bodies. But he'll know going into this fight that he can't afford a loss, but also he can't afford a boring or boring display or a controversial decision win here. He needs to impress. He needs to show that the pathway between him and Roy Jones Jr. going towards world level is the right one. He needs to show that tactical and technical lessons have been learned and that a skill set, the overall package that he now possesses can enable him to compete at world level against, he's in an elite division at middleweight. You've got Golovkin, probably past his best now, but still a formidable fighter. Charlo, of course, unless he moves up for the Canelo fight. It's a tough division. And to mix with those sort of guys, Eubank Jr. needs to show undoubtedly more than he has so far in his biggest tests. You'd have to say the best win on his record against Matvey Korobov, and even that was cut short because of an injury early on. So we didn't really learn much about him from that. Other than that, maybe Arthur Abraham, who still had something left when Eubank dominated him over the stretch. But you want to see Eubank Jr. show something that he hasn't shown before when he goes in on Saturday night with Liam Williams. And it's not just about ignoring the crowd or shutting them out or even using them as fuel while he's out there with lots of proud Welshmen baying for his blood. But also showing that against someone who can box, who can move, who has got fast hands, and these are all ticks in the Williams box, that he knows how to combat that he doesn't rush in recklessly, that he is patient, but not overly patient like he was at times against Marcus Morrison last time out, like he certainly was against Billy Joe Saunders in the early rounds. He needs to show that he can invest early on in the things that are going to benefit him later in the fight, whether that's working to the body, whether that's cutting the ring off, whether that's imposing himself physically because he is the bigger man, leaning on, wrestling around, that kind of thing, roughing Williams up, if you like. He needs to start putting those sort of seeds of doubt in Williams' mind early on and then coming on strong down the stretch when he can make that engine count, he can unload punches in bunches, and he can really start forcing Williams back. I think it's a very, very tough fight for both men. I think their styles will gel really well. And I think Williams has probably shown a bit more at top level than Eubank Jr., although he was outclassed by Demetrius Andrade in his previous world title shot after, twice pushing Liam Smith pretty close. I think the Andrade fight showed that he could get off the deck and really push forward and try to win the fight. He never gave up trying to win. He didn't go into survival mode. And Andrade, for me, I think he's incredibly underrated. I think he's one of the top fighters in the world today. I just don't think he's been given the elite level opponents to prove it just yet. But that's a topic for another day and another vlog. I think Williams showed a lot in that fight. I think at kind of fringe world level and certainly at domestic level, he's proven dominant, as Eubank Jr. did once upon a time. So it is a real, I know you've heard this so many times from different people this week, but it is a real 50-50 fight. But my point is Eubank Jr. cannot afford to labour. He cannot afford to get the benefit of a, questionable decision. He needs a standout performance against one of his toughest tests to date. If he's going to fulfil the ambitions that he's talked about for years now, if he's going to fight the Golovkins or even the Marathas, he needs to do a job. He needs to make a statement against someone like Liam Williams. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to Liam Williams, but if you're going to fight a Triple G or a Canelo, you cannot afford to slip up or even to underperform against Liam Williams. So that's the challenge for Eubank Jr. On Saturday night. As it says in the text on here, it's time to put up or shut up, because we've heard for years how good Eubank Jr. feels he is, that innate talent, ability, mentality, all of that. Well, it's time to put all the pieces together, and we'll see on Saturday night if he does it. And I'm really excited for the fight. Now I want to hear what you guys think. Let me know. I will be back on Monday for Reflections, 4:30 PM, where I'll be looking back on whatever happens in Cardiff. And then next week, Thursday, next FLEXpectations at the same time. Really appreciate you watching. Please do like, comment, subscribe. You have to say all that now, don't you? But yeah, I really do want you to comment. Not as fussed about the other two, if I'm completely honest. And I will see you all soon. Thank you very much. Take care.